Hello, my name is Scott Devon. I'm an art collector and chair of the North Wales Foundation. I'm also the host of Beneath the Varnish. This is a new podcast that's uncovering stories, secrets, and voices that shape the art world. Today we'd like to talk about one of the greatest discoveries in the history of art, the lost Caravaggio. With me today are two friends that are very important in the art world. On my right is Professor David M. Stone, and he's an expert in Italian Baroque and a leading authority in Caravaggio. He is also co-author of Caravaggio, Art, Knighthood, and Malta, along with many other books, especially on Guercino. And on my left is Jorge Coll. He is the owner and CEO of Colnaghi. Colnaghi is founded in 1760, making it the oldest art gallery in the world. Jorge is credited with modernizing Colnaghi and is an expert in Old Masters and Spanish art. Jorge was involved with the documentary called The Sleeper that was just released. I'd like to ask Jorge just how the Sleeper documentary came together on the lost Caravaggio.
Well, I mean, the documentary was actually a challenge because, the process of researching a painting and actually giving birth to the full attribution, it's very complex, it's delicate. Just by chance, they met a very important cinema director, Álvaro Longoria, in Madrid, who happens to be one of my best friends. And Álvaro had chased me to do the documentary also, because there was a lot of, Netflix, Disney, a lot of people were calling us to make a documentary just at the beginning of the process. I think it's 1 hour and 15 minutes, but it really captions all the different parts of the process, the restoration, the institutional conversations, the research, the different works of Christina, of Keith, Giuseppe, Gianni. So I think that it's never done before, really to capture the process of the baptism of a painting like this.
Can you tell us a little bit about how a painting shows up at auction for a value of $1,600 and then all of a sudden turns into a $36 million painting?
Yeah, they're very difficult to understand, and that's why they've remained in the dark for 200 years. And then suddenly they come up at auction, usually on with a lot of restorations on top or, thick varnish layers, so they're difficult to read. And then the way to unveil all that value, it's long, but if you manage to do it properly like we did, then of course makes it worth that price. In this case, the price was also limited by the fact that the painting was notified. In the open international market would have fetched 9 to 10 times more.
Notified meaning it was supposed to stay in the country of origin.
It's declared unexportable. So it's notified. It's a good which is of national interest, and therefore it cannot leave the country.
Is it just the custom that busy auction houses just don't stop and say, I wonder if we should just clean the face? I wonder if we should, it's not a big picture, I wonder if we should clean this to make sure that we didn't make a mistake? Or is it really the person who puts it on consignment at the auction who has to make that determination whether or not to stop and say, let's clean this a little bit before offering it to the auction house? How does that normally work?
So basically the family over the years had the confirmation that was an important painting. And they were always had this feeling that the painting could be important. But then, it's been time after time, the painting is not important. And then, accidentally they decided, one day you wake up with a mute and, they're taking this painting to the auction, just take that one also.
Okay.
So it was more of a mute decision rather than a calculated decision.
Okay.
Then regarding the auctions, I think that the auctions know that if they create this sense of discovery, sleeper, they will attract much more people. And at the end of the day, the result or the figure that they need to fetch, most probably they're going to fetch. I mean, nowadays, A sleeper would be purely the definition is when you are by yourself and you find it. Now, a sleeper, there's always 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 top dealers, like it was, in the case of the Caravaggio, that they already know that. So it's so globalized that after 2 days online, everybody knows. And the auction houses know. So they create this kind of expectation which actually boosts the interest of the market.
So don't clean it. Don't get a sophisticated attribution. Let it go in raw.
It's not our job. We're a channel where we're a stage where we put in this painting in this stage and the market will decide.
Okay.
I mean, that's one way to do it.
So a new picture comes up, and the first thing you have to say is, well, where in these different periods does this picture fit? But in a way, there's a paradox with that question, because if you knew this painting ahead of time, and if this new painting, say, you found documents that really proved exactly when it was done, which isn't necessarily the case with this one, but there is a good provenance. But if you had a document that said exactly where it is, then it's pretty easy to start right there readjusting your ideas of, well, this is what's capable, this is what Caravaggio is doing when he first gets to Naples. This is what the Naples period looks like, because we have this new picture and it has a document, it has a particular date on it. But without that, people are not necessarily willing to give up right away. So then there's all kinds of discussions, how to make a picture fit. We're in a moment in Caravaggio studies where the old chronology is starting to wear out. And as Keith Christensen has said to me several times in the last 10 years, we're ready to have a new chronology of Caravaggio. We're going to have to give up the old guidelines and start building again an idea of Caravaggio stylistic development. We're going to have to rebuild it.
What are the ways we can scientifically test the pigments or the frame itself, the timeline? Can you explain
the problem is you can do all the pigment analysis you want, but the pigments that Caravaggio and other contemporary artists use doesn't change from year to year.
It's not so affirmative, but it's more like to disregard.
You eliminate.
Right, it's dispositive. If you have 19th century pigments in a 17th century painting, you're in trouble unless it's a later restoration. So you can eliminate things, or even 18th century
I would
stuff.
say that if you agree that pigments are not so definitive, I mean, they're just a way to not to eliminate the painting. What it's more enlightening sometimes is the X-rays, because in the X-rays you can see if there's a compositions, if there are changes on a composition, and that it gives you a little bit more of information in the sense that, a copy doesn't have changes in the composition. Yeah. So if in the X-ray you're reading that, you can see how the artist is working, how he's changing his mind, how he's evolving the composition while he's painting. That on the technical side is what gives you a little bit more of information.
Let's talk a little bit about his techniques of how he painted versus the other masters before him.
He arrives in Rome where there was establishment. I mean, Michelangelo, Raphael, the classicists, and there was a way to produce art. No, that you would have to go to the academy, you would have to work on your sketches, and then you would have to follow certain rules for composition. And then suddenly Caravaggio comes and says, I'm going to paint what I see, and I'm going to use my peers as models. So he completely changed the rules, and he doesn't follow any of the the laws that they were established at the time. So that creates a revolution and creates followers, but also creates haters.
He was very threatening to the academy because they wanted everybody sort of in the tradition of the Zucchero family and the Carracci to be masters at drawing and draw after the antique, or at least understand the importance of antique statuary in one's development, one's learning. And Caravaggio paints after a live nude model directly without doing sketches ahead of time. So that's very threatening based on what
he didn't sketch on the canvas, and he just went right in and painted from.
He would do some incisions.
He'd make incisions. And maybe a few brush strokes.
Just for composition.
Just for composition. But he would pose the model the way he wanted it there. The composing is his moving around with the model in the studio, and not doing preparatory drawings, so as best we know.
And his models were bar friends and prostitutes and beggars, and they
Well,
were.
he didn't have money at all.
So yeah.
When he arrived to Rome, he's coming from Milan. He doesn't belong to a well-off family, and he had to look for his. He was working for workshops. I mean, we know he started painting still lifes and portraits. All of those portraits and still lifes, who knows where they are?
Yeah.
That's the job of
Another sleeper hunter.
Oh yeah, we know. So that's actually one of the nice things, because we have the literature. And we know that those things are there, and we need to find them. No, but he didn't have the means to pay like models. I mean, he was just inspired by his talent, and he would go with it.
So the reason he created an earthquake, was it more stylistic, or was it his draftsmanship, his talent, or did he paint like from what I've read the real truth? The honest truth of people, the saints with dirt on their feet and things like that. Didn't anybody do that prior?
He confronts people like, now we were talking about Guido Reni these days. Guido Reni is a very established painter. He was a rich painter. His paintings were much more expensive than the Caravaggio at the beginning. But he comes from the Bologna school, from the Corazis, from the tradition. He's following the rules. And suddenly you have this man that it's just like, I came here, I'm not going to follow any rule. And this is what I can offer. And suddenly, it's a really new style, and people start loving it because it's real. And then also, I guess, that his personality, he was always in trouble. He was accused of wearing illegally arms. He was, having fights. So, all of that, I guess that already built up a legend.
Yeah.
In
I
life.
mean, he really was good at self-fashioning, at creating a persona as a kind of bad boy of art and a rebel. He fostered that. It wasn't just something that came out of thin air. I mean, certainly the critics fed into that, but he built on that. And so later critics, would accuse Caravaggio he couldn't draw, his art's not based on good principles, and maybe even a bigger sin, unlike the Carracci, he didn't have a proper art academy. Mm-hmm. All of these painters, they follow Caravaggio's method, which doesn't require, great ability at drawing. As one critic said, they're full of figures with, rusty armor, bad haircuts, dirt under their fingernails, and that Caravaggio is a bad model for young artists to follow. So the whole establishment that's based on the Art Academy, on drawing, and especially on generalizing, idealizing the human figure, he's doing something really totally different with realism, not teaching young artists to draw, not teaching young artists to draw after plaster casts or after actual classical statues. And so the establishment art critics, they say bad things about Caravaggio for 50 years and even longer.
How did he come up with the subjects to paint? Was he commissioned by the church, or was he commissioned by private collectors or individuals to paint, or did he just come up on his own?
Very, very quickly, after the first 3 or 4 years, he gets discovered by Francesco Maria del Monte and by Vincenzo Giustiniani. Those are his two main patrons, and then he starts getting commissions. Even though the critics talk about him as this totally rebellious person, but he actually gets commissions from major churches pretty early, and then his career explodes from then on. People like his paintings, which also makes the old time critics, I think, somewhat resentful.
Well, it's this talent that this eruption of talent that you cannot stop.
Yeah.
You want it to stop, but you can't.
Yeah. And this particular painting, the Ecce Homo, that has been rediscovered by Caravaggio, can you talk a little bit about that particular painting, Jorge, for us?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when we first saw the painting, it was really, they had 3 different campaigns of restoration, and there was a really thick layer of varnish, so it was difficult to see, but it had that impact, that wow factor where you see there's something there. I mean, for me, the most revealing aspect was this way of building a space, like 3 spaces. You have 3 figures that, you are the viewer, and you have this feeling of depth and in the painting, and that's something which is quite difficult to build up, and if you see all the hands, how they are, put them together, there's a lot of movement and a lot of drama, so
he seems to capture the expressions of the three people quite effectively, and Pontius Pilate, the first character, really even comes through the canvas towards the viewer.
He's presenting you Christ.
Behold the man is Ecce Homo.
And you have this sense of a window, and then he's presenting and in a very, what I found quite inspiring from Caravaggio is that he takes all these models or the sitters very much on the front part of a painting. So you have it's a very impactful composition. You always have these big figures, on first place looking to you. So they really create this disruptive feeling where you immediately, your attention is drawn to the drama of the composition.
Yeah, and it also seems like, the Christ figure here isn't the idealistic in the sky, heavens, or the clouds that, some of the previous artists have done. He's Christ's humanity is shown, and his suffering and the humility that he shows is very, very much a human aspect.
That was the way he painted. Yeah. But then, if you know a little bit about Caravaggio, the flagellation in Naples, I mean, that Christ was, there's a very strong relationship immediately that you can see. And you don't see it here in the book, but here on the left shoulder, there's this zigzag brushstroke. That's kind of a signature. So there's a very quick brushstroke in zigzag that you have it also in the flagellation.
Exactly.
And that was like something that you wouldn't see in any other painter.
Caravaggio is also known for the chiaroscuro and the tenebrism. Can you talk a little bit about how that is and what he changed?
The very earliest pictures that we know, the so-called youthful blonde pictures, they don't have that deep chiaroscuro. But it's something that happens in the most extraordinary, magical way around the time that he does the Giustiniani lute player, where the background, now instead of being this light blonde color, is dark, and there's a stripe of light coming down diagonally that divides the canvas in this way that creates an immediate drama. There's this tension between the light part and the dark part. Mm-hmm. And it seems to take place in a particular moment in time. And instead of just general lighting, you seem to see a moment captured in time. And he develops that rather quickly in religious paintings. Now the stripe of light is double functioning. It's both a kind of religious, spiritual activation of the scene.
Like a divine light.
Like Christ or God entering into our realistic, our everyday experience. You see very common looking people in everyday contemporary clothes with this amazing realism in the painting technique. But at the same time, you see a light that functions, that is descriptive. It is a kind of realistic looking light, but because it's a religious picture, it now is a metaphor of a kind of a divine intervention.
Nobody had seen it before.
No.
So suddenly he adds this ingredient that everybody finds like, wow, why this didn't happen before? I mean, it was there, and and he brings it, and then you see, Rivera, the Longhi paintings have the same cut, and all the rest, they are following him.
It's a formula for a certain kind of dramatic religious spirituality, an intervention, a change.
So besides Rembrandt, who did Caravaggio influence?
Orazio Gentileschi, Bartolomeo Manfredi, and then Frenchmen like Vouet and Valentin de Boulogne, and of course Ribera, who, thanks to Johnny Poppy and other people's research, we know was active in Rome long before we previously thought.
Well, actually, I think that it's important to make a distinction about which were the artists that were living in Rome at the same time. So you had Rivera, you have Manfredi, and Valentin de Boulogne, who were living at the same time.
Yeah.
And then all the other artists comes later.
They come later, right.
They didn't know Caravaggio, and instead...
It was paintings, but not him as a person.
And Orazio and Caravaggio were friends.
Yeah. Friends. Mm-hmm. And Orazio is Artemisia's father.
Right.
Yes.
Caravaggio, though, after he died in his short, violent life, at 39, I think, kind of came out of favor or fashion and was dismissed for a while or not
Well,
talked about.
big time actually. On the early 19th century, this painting was in the storage of the Royal Academy in Spain. Evaristo Pérez de Castro, who was the ancestor of the owners, exchanged the painting by Alonso Cano. And it's actually in the minutes of the board meeting of that year, it's we exchanged the Ecce Homo by Caravaggio by this Alonso Cano. So they would rather have an Alonso Cano. In the late 19th century, these painters were not valuable by any means.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the fascination of the personality of Caravaggio. Obviously, he's been described as a sociopath, person without boundaries. How did that affect his paintings and his art and his popularity?
Well, I mean, I think that you cannot separate one thing to the other. No, people who's passionate in life, it's also passionate on their, on their inspiration and when they paint. No, and I think that this character, it's obviously reflected in his painting and the way that he deals with his production. No, then you see also the different periods of his life and the themes that he's choosing and the way that he's representing them. That maybe it's also a reflection of what he was going through,
The fact of the matter is that unlike many artists, Guido Reni maybe being among them, Caravaggio's professional life was under a lot of control. Somebody gave him a contract to do an altarpiece. I mean, most of the time he seems to just get right to it, and he does it, and the people seem to be very pleased with it. He controlled his temper when he was painting. Mm-hmm. But then certainly once he kills Ranuccio Tomassoni and it lives the rest of his life in exile, you really see a change in his art. In the first Naples period, when the Ecce Homo and the flagellation and the seven works of mercy are from, but I think particularly when he's in Malta for over a year trying to get a knighthood and get a papal pardon via the Grand Master of the Knights of Malta's intervention. There's both a kind of sense of strength in his pictures from the Malta period, but also I think a kind of isolation, a sense of really living in exile, away from his friends in Rome. That couldn't have been much fun for him.
Yeah, it seemed like his art, when he was in exile, was where he created a lot of the masterpieces too.
Oh, they're some of his best paintings. I mean, and I think it's his most profound period with these. Keith Christensen in the Ecce Homo book that Jorge produced, Keith Christensen talks about the wonderful development in Caravaggio's style with these empty backgrounds, these huge spaces, like in the Raising of Lazarus and the Malta beheading of St. John in the co-cathedral. These huge empty backgrounds, and they become like resonators, and it takes your breath away, these huge theatrical canvases.
And then the Ecce Homo that was rediscovered was during his late period?
It's after he goes in, after he leaves Rome. He's in exile from Rome. There's a what's called a bando capitale. There's a like a warrant out for him.
Yeah.
But in Naples, he's in another country. Naples is under the Viceroy of Spain. So he's the Roman, the Vatican police, if you will, can't get him in a Spanish territory of Naples, so he's safe there.
And he actually became a Knight of Malta.
He gets his knighthood, but then within days, weeks of getting his knighthood, he commits this offense, is jailed, and then probably with the help of some or more knights, one or more knights, he escapes by boat in the middle of the night and makes his way to Sicily.
There's a lot of controversy around his death, as far as if it was lead poisoning or from the paints, or was he murdered?
Well, we know that he died from fever.
From fever.
So, what caused that fever? But it was a very unfortunate fever because, we had such a great artist and to leave us so early. What would have been the next Caravaggio period, going back to Rome and painting again? Can you imagine? Yeah,
that is something that we just are so unfortunate to be deprived of. The next episode in Caravaggio's life, what new developments, new artists were rising in this period. And then, what would he have done? Would he have taken over leadership again?
I mean, sometimes you think about what missed opportunity in history of art, and I think that the loss of Caravaggio was definitely one of those.
Could you tell our listeners, viewers, a little bit about the life of what you lead with Colnaghi in such a historical business that you run at a young age, I might say?
It's my passion, so that's why I wouldn't say it's effortless, because it's not. It's very important that we travel, because we're in front of the paintings. We are with the collectors. We get to know people. So the fact that you've been around, that you have the personal relationship, it really makes a difference. And that's why I think that having this extra mile about being busy and traveling rather than dealing from one place makes us more competitive in a way.
Is this the biggest find in your career, this Caravaggio, or have there been others, or there's ones coming, or tell us a little bit about that?
Well, obviously it's been a big, my biggest find, yes. And I have to credit also other galleries, Lulo and Pampulides and Filippo Benapi. I think that, my generation, and this is something that I'm really proud of, we put a lot of effort on trying to respect our colleagues and if possible work together rather than competing and not supporting us and supporting the market. I think that that's important to be helpful and to be able to work together. So this was actually a team effort, and so far, yes, I mean, to find a Caravaggio from the Spanish Royal Collection, I mean, it doesn't happen every day. Yeah. So there are more slippers to come. Yeah. Thanks, Scott. And
well, we're glad that you're both here in enlightening us here. The subject of old masters is something that obviously we all three share. Where's the state of the old masters in general?
The old masters require time, require education and understanding. And obviously the contemporary art world, it's more accessible, it's easier to get you talking to the artist. The knowledge range, it's different, no? So I think that it's more a reflection of the society where, we have this very small attention span and, we need to keep going. But I think that in terms of taste and in terms of, after 30 years of very strong cycle of contemporary, people turns around and say, like, look, contemporary art is the kind of prices makes you look backwards and say, look, what about this? Maybe this is also very interesting. It's more established, and maybe I'm going to give an opportunity. And we found and that's what, in Colnaghi, we, one of the things that I wanted to have is a very young team that also, it's less scary. When you come into an old master gallery, you need to be welcoming, you need to be warm. I think that one of our obligations is to be able to educate people. People, they don't have any obligation to be educated, and you need to break all those barriers. And for that reason, specifically, we studied the Colnaghi Foundation, to educate and to share the interest in the old masters. So I definitely think that there's a lot that we can do, and I'm seeing results now after 10 years. So I'm happy about that, and I hope that we have a healthy future.
That's great.
For the old masters.
And then Professor Stone, as far as your experience with your students over the decades and years, and what changes have you seen recently from, say, in the past?
Well, I would say one thing that is important to teach people is not to assume that people necessarily know Western history inside and out, that sometimes there are gaps that need to be filled in, and the history of the church. You can't assume that everybody knows what the subject matter is. And so I think that one of the pathways to getting people excited about old master paintings is to explain a little bit what some of the subject matter is of works, and that can be a nice hook.
Well, and with the access to information on the computer and whatnot, we have records now of auctions that we didn't have before. They're accessible to a collector like myself. Mm-hmm. Some more knowledge about the history of the stories, of course, are fascinating, of the individuals that painted over the history. But you almost have to be a historian to kind of, like you say, understand the climate that they were in and the whole what was going on in the world at the time.
Well, I mean, a whole approach to art history, sort of decade by decade, it keeps changing. But say 50 years ago, it was just beginning to be what's called contextual art history. Prior to that, art history classes were mostly about style.
Okay.
And then history became contextual history, social, economic history, socio-religious history became a big part of understanding painting. But then more recently, gender studies, gender and race studies became really important. The rise of interest in female artists like Lavinia Fontana, Artemisia Gentileschi, Elisabetta Sirani, and so on and so forth. That became a huge element in the 90s and continues to this day unabated.
What do you think about, speaking of evolution of art, and obviously, a topic that's current and on everybody's mind is artificial intelligence and what impact that might have on either attributions or other aspects of new art that's being created in the future?
We need to see the evidence that AI can do proper connoisseurship analysis. So I wait to be instructed on this and hope that it happens, though, I may lose part of my job if it does.
And how has that affected Colnaghi, Jorge?
Well, I mean, as a company, we're already using artificial intelligence, but on the daily matters, on let's say, on the emailing, on project managing, but not on the attributional side. When you're running a company which is nearly 300 years old, you cannot keep looking back all the time. Mm-hmm. We have a say at Colnaghi, which is, to keep tradition is not to keep the ashes, but to keep the fire going. You need to embrace progress, and you don't need to fight against it. And I think that my generation as a dealer were, completely affected by the birth of internet. My parents were dealers, and obviously the fact that people could not check catalogs in the internet make the role of a dealer much more important. When internet became really functioning, auction catalogs were online, the market completely globalized. So there was no a need of a local dealer, and that changed the market completely and actually turned around, because you need to think that about, around on the 90s, maybe 90% of the turnover in the art world was, through dealerships. And the 10% or 20%, which was in the auction houses, the main bidders were the dealers. Now we're looking into a completely different scenario where the auction houses have multiplied. There's less dealers, and, the bidders in the auction houses, they're not necessarily dealers. So that changed through technology.
I'd like to thank our guest, Jorge Coll, from the famous Colnaghi Gallery, for enlightening us on the rediscovery of the Caravaggio Ecce Homo, and also to Professor Stone for his expertise and knowledge of the art world, and particularly the old masters of Caravaggio and the followers. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'd like to say thank you for our viewers for this first episode of Beneath the Varnish. I can't wait to share more untold stories of art in future episodes. Until then, may you find what's hidden beneath the varnish, one podcast at a time.